In the spring of the year 542 CE, Constantinople, the majestic capital of the Roman Empire, awoke not to the usual bustle of trade and devotion, but to a chilling silence. Ships arriving from distant corners of the empire carried more than grain, they bore an invisible specter of death, a relentless plague that would forever alter the course of history. How does a thriving empire with golden domes become a city of empty streets and mourning? This is the haunting tale of the plague of Justinian, the first recorded pandemic of its kind. It began quietly on the eastern shores of Egypt in the town of Pelusium, where the disease first crept outward unchecked. By the year 540, Emperor Justinian, who had just silenced ancient pagan worship by ordering the destruction of the great temple of Isis, faced an ironic and terrifying trial. His empire, proclaiming Christian triumph, was blindsided by a pestilence so vast that even the faithful wondered if the divine had turned their faces away. This pestilence, as chronicled by the historian Procopius of Caesarea, moved like a shadow along the Mediterranean coast, slipping through Alexandria, Palestine, and Syria, hitching rides on grain ships bound for Constantinople. In the imperial capital, the plague exploded into devastation. Streets once alive with markets and prayers echoed with death. Procopius witnessed men collapsing in the streets and bodies piling rapidly, so many that graves overflowed and corpses were cast into towers and cisterns. The emperor himself was not spared this unseen enemy. Justinian fell gravely ill, as did countless citizens, rich and poor alike. The capital became a city gripped by fear, its markets shuttered, courts empty, and even the sea waters bloated with bodies cast off in despair. The air, heavy with incense, once a symbol of faith and hope, carried the choking stench of death itself. Beyond the city walls, the plague ravaged the countryside. John of Ephesus recounted villages where only a handful of survivors remained. Fields lay abandoned, harvests rotted uncollected, and cattle wandered untended through empty lands. The historian Evagrius Scholasticus, who survived the plague as a child, described horrifying symptoms: fevers burning like fire, swollen glands, dizziness, and darkness before the eyes. There was no mercy in this grim visitor. By the spring of 542, the pandemic had spread from Constantinople outward across the empire, from Antioch to Illyricum, Africa, Italy, Gaul, and even to the distant Isles of Britain. The Mediterranean, once a sea of commerce and connection, had become a watery graveyard for countless souls. Its origins remained shrouded in mystery and fear. Some whispered it came from India, others Ethiopia, echoing an ancient dread that pestilence traveled from the burning south. The empire's vast trade networks may have unwittingly transported the plague northward with grain shipments, spreading tragedy in their wake. The plague did not end with a single wave. Like a cruel tide, it returned again and again in cycles over years. Towns once spared would fall, and cities would stagger back to life only to be struck again. Each wave drained the empire's lifeblood, emptying streets, silencing workshops, and filling graves so deep they stretched beyond the city walls. Despite the overwhelming horror, the people clung to their rituals and faith. They washed hands with care, covered faces as best they could, and moved silently through the streets lined with death. Even as the emperor struggled to endure, the empire fought a relentless battle between collapse and survival. The plague's grip extended beyond bodies to the very structure of the empire. Tax rolls faltered as families vanished, estates stood idle without workers, and markets emptied. Skilled labor became scarce, prolonging the rebuilding of bridges and baths. Yet the administration evolved, finding new ways to govern amidst scarcity, leaning on monasteries and clergy to aid in charity and care. Military forces adapted to this new reality. Garrisons were replenished from less afflicted regions, pay was reallocated cautiously, and strategic patience replaced swift campaigns. Ships that brought soldiers and grain sometimes brought the pestilence too, yet the empire's command learned to factor absence into its survival plans, holding key fortresses against the shadows of death. The plague left an indelible mark upon law, society, and memory. It became a measure of calamity against which all other misfortunes were weighed. Calendars marked years of fasting and prayers, inheritance laws adjusted to count the missing. And monasteries rose in importance as guardians of both the dead and the living. The empire remembered its darkest days not with despair alone, but with resilience. In the mosaic-adorned halls of Constantinople's Hagia Sophia, Emperor Justinian was immortalized, presenting a model of the Great Basilica to the Virgin Mary, a symbol of divine hope amidst human suffering. The plague had tested the empire's faith and endurance, yet from those trials, a new Byzantine society arose, tempered by loss but resolute in rebuilding. This story of the Justinianic Plague teaches us much today. It reminds us how invisible forces can not only devastate but reshape civilizations. It reveals the strength in human adaptation and the fragile thread by which society persists. In a world still vulnerable to pandemics, the echoes of Justinian's time warn and inspire us in equal measure. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more. See you in the next one.